So coming up this weekend is going to be UFC Macau, which is going to be the UFC's first event in a region of China for a very long time. I don't think that they have done a card in China for a very long time, and now they are going to be doing it in Macau. Now, I know that they have been trying to put a card on in China for a long time, since they put the UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai, and since then they have had quite a few fighters from China come into the promotion, but we haven't had an event in China. And I think that this is going to be a pretty fun one. Of course, the Road to UFC Finals is going to be taking place on this card, and also just in general, it is a fight night in front of a crowd, which unfortunately looking at 2025 is something we're not going to be getting very much of, so I think we need to enjoy it as it does happen. Now, this card is taking place at a different time for a lot of people. For me, it's taking place at 9 p.m. on Saturday night, which is perfect because I'm in New Zealand, but for a lot of people it could be on very early hours of the morning at 3 a.m. Eastern time, which does make sense because that's just the local time there, even though they wouldn't do that for that UK card when I think Edwards and Bilal put it like 5 a.m. local time, but nonetheless, I think it should be pretty good. Of course, we do have a lot of content up on the We Want Picks website. It is $10 per month to join, but you can get 10% off your first purchase or first membership if you do sign up using my code ARTEM. And if you do sign up using my code ARTEM, you do support my channel a lot, a very significant amount. So I do appreciate that. And I also do appreciate reaching 8,000 subscribers. We must have done it last week, and I just didn't notice. So thank you guys very much for hitting that 8,000 mark. Very much is appreciated. Now let's go down to the first fight of the night. It's going to be Maheshate Hayisaer fighting against Nikolas Motta. Kind of a similar stylistic matchup. Both of these guys aren't going to wrestle, and if anyone is, it's probably going to be Motta. So I think we can assume this to be a striking fight between two strikers. Now, the way that I see this fight is I think that Maheshate is going to be wanting to fight from the outside, whereas Nikolas Motta is definitely going to be wanting to close the distance and find success with his massive shots up and close. And we did just see Nikolas Motta win, in my opinion anyway, a pretty similar stylistic matchup when he did go out there and knock out Tom Nolan in Tom Nolan's UFC debut. And I do think that it is a similar stylistic matchup, as Tom Nolan is a very dangerous yet tall, lengthy striker at lightweight. Now, I do think that Maheshate Hayisaer isn't as aggressive, though, that Tom Nolan is. Tom Nolan really was just crashing forward, and that's how we got caught by Motta. I don't think Maheshate is going to make those same mistakes, and I think that a lot of people are going to be on the Motta side because Motta does just land with a lot of power. He is a very powerful striker, but I think that if Maheshate does come out here with a game plan to fight from range, I think that we can see him go out there and find success. And it's not like Maheshate hasn't been able to find that success before. He's coming off a pretty recent win, but before that, though, his most recent win was over Steve Garcia, and that is a knockout win that has aged very well. Since then, though, he did, of course, lose to Vacislav Borchev and Rafa Garcia, but then he did just beat Gabriel Benitez, who is a former featherweight, and that wasn't really a good split decision to have. But I do think that we can see Maheshate go out there now in front of a local crowd, and I think that he can defeat Nikolas Motta here, and I think that he can get it done. Wow, okay, 70% of people are picking Maheshate in this matchup. I really thought that it was going to be the opposite, and he's minus 210. So, Nikolas Motta, I am picking Maheshate here, but I think that Nikolas Motta could be a pretty good underdog, but I think that Maheshate does win the fight. Now we have Xiao fighting against Quang, and I think that this is honestly a pretty good matchup for Quang. Now, I have seen quite a few people picking Xiao in this fight, but Quang I feel like showed that he is a very good fighter in his debut on short notice against Chris Gutierrez. He came in against Chris Gutierrez on less than 1 week's notice, and I said that this is a fight that should be lined a lot closer than it was, and although Quang did lose the fight, you have to admit he gave Chris Gutierrez a pretty tough matchup, and Chris Gutierrez is a guy that, if he's not ranked right now, he at least was ranked at one point, and he was on the big come-up before running into Pedro Munoz, but Quang looked like he kind of did fit in, and prior to that, he is just a very, very explosive guy. He is mostly a striker, but he can shoot for takedowns. I don't think he's going to shoot for takedowns against Xiao though, because Xiao is a slick grappler, and not really too much more other than the slick grappler, I would say. But if you do look into him, the UFC has wanted this guy to sign to the promotion for a long time. They've given him a lot of opportunities. He fought on the Contender Series and had a pretty close fight with Christian Quinones. Since then, won a couple of fights. Then was meant to be on the road to UFC tournament in 2022. Both of his fights got cancelled for various reasons. Probably lucky for him, he didn't fight Felipe Lima in that bonus fight. And then he comes back in 2023. A couple rescheduling because he had bad visa issues, I believe it was why this fight kept getting pushing back. He has that close fight with Chang Ho Lee, and now he's still in the promotion despite losing the finals. I think, though, this is a good matchup for Quang Le. Quang Le, I think, is a great fighter. I think he's very, very explosive. I think he's going to be much better on the feet. Although he is shorter, I think he's going to be the bigger fighter here, and I think he can defend the takedowns, which are definitely going to be coming his way. I'm going to pick Quang Le to win this matchup, and I'm going to pick him to win by knockout. He is a underdog on Bet Online, but it looks like on other sports books he's a slight favorite, so it looks like this fight could end up being an even odds matchup by the time the fight rolls around. But I think that Quang Le does win this one, and I think that Quang Le does win this one by finish. Now we have Lona Kavanagh fighting against Jose Ochoa. Both of these guys are making their debuts, but both of these guys are fun fighters, and I can nearly guarantee you guys that this is going to be a fight of the night contender. Lona Kavanagh is a very, very fast boxer, and those fast hands were showcased in his Dana White's Contender Series fight. Now, I knew that Lona Kavanagh was a fast boxer, but my goodness, were those hands quick when he did fight against Antoine Ho. And I thought that Lona Kavanagh was going to win a close decision against Antoine Ho, but instead, he knocked him out in the first round and looked very good in doing it. Now, I will say that Antoine Ho was landing a couple of shots every now and then, which could be dangerous coming into this matchup against Jose Ochoa, but for the most part, Lona Kavanagh was making the reads, and he ended up getting a crazy knockout. And before that, though, he had his best performance. I thought that his performance against Sean Marcos da Silva was his best performance to date. I thought that he looked the best in that matchup than he had in his previous ones, despite getting finishes in some of them. And I think that in this fight against Ochoa, he should be at a pretty good boxing advantage. Now, the problem that he may face in this one here is just the fact that Ochoa simply is a shooter box guy. And what I mean by that is he is a very, very aggressive fighter with the Muay Thai sort of style with a lot of kicks, and also he does shoot for takedowns, and when he does get takedowns, very aggressive BJJ. All of these Charles Oliveira minions, they all fight the same. Super overly aggressive Muay Thai style. Think of Alves Brenner, think of Daniel Santos, think of anyone else, Marco Tulio, even at middleweight, you can think of him too. They all come forward, they all throw high volume, they all throw a lot of kicks, and when they do come forward, they do inevitably shoot for takedowns every now and then, and do have very aggressive BJJ. I would say, though, that Ochoa mostly kind of specializes actually in the striking sort of side. A lot of his wins have come by knockout. I think that in this matchup, he is probably going to attempt takedowns on Lona Kavanagh, but one thing about Lona Kavanagh is I know for a fact that he's working on his grappling, because I was actually getting messages from people that know Lona Kavanagh prior to his Contender Series fight saying that Lona wants to eventually showcase his grappling. So maybe we see some grappling in this one here, but I do think it's going to be a striking affair, and I do think that Lona Kavanagh is going to be going out there and landing some pretty big shots with the hands. I think that inevitably someone's getting finished either way, but I think it is going to be Lona Kavanagh. I think he is going to win this matchup. Here, he's minus 400 on the odds. That's pretty wide. He's a great prospect, though, and I do think he does go out there and get it done. Now, Su Young-Yu fights against Balgyn Jenisuly in the finals. This is the bantamweight finals here of the Road to UFC tournament. So these guys have fought 2 times before against other fighters that were in the tournament, and they both have got the wins, of course, to make it to the finals. Su Young-Yu is a grappler, and that's kind of it. He doesn't really offer too much else, I will be honest with you. He does have very strong top control, though, if he does get the fight down to the ground. And if he does get the fight down to the ground, he does land occasional ground and pound, but I would say for the most part, he's actually going out there and trying to find the submission win. On the feet, he doesn't have that much to offer. In my opinion anyway. I think that Balgyn Jenisuly is going to be the much more well-rounded fighter out of the two, because Balgyn has actually been on the tournament before. He did fight on a previous tournament in the 2023 season, and then he come back after that and got a win over Xavier Alaoui, who was, I believe, a pretty decent Canadian prospect in his own right. come back. He did beat Feng Li, but that was just a layup, to be honest. He was meant to fight against Agasa, who was a former One Championship fighter, which would have been cool. But Balgyn Jenisuly, I think that he does have a more well-rounded skill set. I would say for the most part, what he likes to do is he likes to wrestle in his own right, but he does set it up quite well with the boxing, and he does like to pressure forward a lot. So he's like a moving forwards striker that does shoot for a takedown on occasion, where I feel like Su Young-yu really does rely on that grappling and on that wrestling. I do think, though, in this matchup, though, that I think Su Young-yu can get the takedowns, and I think if he does get the takedowns, I think that his grappling is just a little bit better than Balgyn Jenisuly's, but I think that this is a pretty close matchup, and I think that Su Young-yu, if I'm not mistaken, is the underdog, and this is an underdog pick. It's not. He's minus 140, so Su Young-yu, very slight favourite in this matchup, but I do think that he is going to go out there and defeat Balgyn Jenisuly in this fight. Now we can move up to the prelim fight, which is going to be Kiru Sahota fighting against Donghoon Choi. Out of all of the fighters that has actually impressed me the most on the tournament, it actually has been Donghoon Choi. And Donghoon Choi has defeated a couple of pretty good guys. You know, he fought a guy that was on a previous tournament in Junior Yushiwei, and then he defeated Ungard Bisht, who was actually my pick to win the entire tournament. And I did go back and I watched those fights, of course. And I do think that Shui did defeat Junior Shui, but I thought that you definitely could make an argument for Bisht to win the fight. But Shui did end up getting the nod there, and he is going to be now fighting against Kiru Sahota, who is representing England and India in the tournament here. Kiru Sahota, he came into the tournament when I thought that he was actually a lot more of a wrestler than he actually is. I did watch quite a few of his fights that he did have for previous promotions. Most notably, of course, he did fight for Cage Warriors, but he did fight for a couple of other European promotions too. And I thought that this guy was going to go out there and grapple a lot more than he did. But he didn't. He kind of, for the most part, went up there in the Road to UFC tournament, and he struck for the most part. He's a very tall guy at 125 pounds. He's listed here at 5'10", and if you do watch his fight, especially against Penales, man, he is tall for this weight class. And he does use that range pretty well. He does, for the most part, strike from range, and he can get a takedown on occasion. One thing, though, that I did notice is that he doesn't like moving backwards. And I thought that his fight against Penales, despite he did win it, Penales is a very inexperienced guy who really is super one-dimensional and can only strike. And Penales was finding a lot more success in the matchup than I kind of expected him to. And now he's fighting a guy in Donghoon Choi, who is a very good striker. He is 8-0 now at this point in his career, but he's not a guy that's gone 8-0 without any adversity at all, because I was watching his matchups before coming into this tournament, and this guy had felt some adversity in his matchups. Against this guy, Kenta Kubo, you could argue that he was feeling a little bit of pressure in that matchup before getting a pretty nice knockout over Kenta Kubo in that third round. And Kubo did give him some problems. He did manage to take him down, and he did manage to give him a couple of he hurt him a little bit throughout the matchup, and then he got the massive KO there. Against New Yoshiwara, for the most part, he has to try and defend takedowns for the first round, and then he does land a massive kick to like the liver at the start of the second round, and he drops him. And then aside from that, he fights against Junior Shui and Ungard Bisht by striking the whole time. But against Ungard Bisht, though, what I was surprised about was how he attempted offensive takedowns. And I think that could be an interesting part of this matchup, because I think that Donghoon Choi actually is the better striker here. And maybe if he can hurt Sahota at the end of a round, he might actually shoot for a takedown as well and score a couple of points with some ground and pound after that. I am going to pick Donghoon Choi in this matchup. I think that he is the better striker out of the two. I have been impressed by him the most out of the two, despite, honestly, I wasn't too sure about that Bisht decision. I'll be clear about that, but Bisht was my pick to win the entire thing, and Choi looked pretty good, aside from getting hurt in the first round, of course, in that matchup. So Donghoon Choi, minus 150 here. He is the favourite over Kiru Sahota. Looks like we might be going with a bunch of favourites to win the tournament. I am picking Choi. One thing I will say is there was meant to be, of course, a featherweight tournament, and that has been cancelled. Kang Shi Xu is now out. Zhu Kangxie. Zhu Kangxie was my pick. He was an underdog. Unfortunately, we've lost an underdog pick with that one. Unfortunately. Now, Feng Xiaocan is fighting against Ming. I think that Feng Xiaocan is the real deal. I mean, she's really good. One thing as well about Feng Xiaocan is before coming into the road to UFC tournament, she actually had already beaten a lot of fighters that were in the tournament. She beat Miki Matono in 2023 and then beat her again in the road to UFC tournament. And then also prior to that, she actually had beaten Huang Fei, who also was on the tournament. Huang Fei, I believe Ming fought her at some point. No, she didn't. Ignore that. But nonetheless, Feng Xiaocan had actually already beaten a few opponents before coming into the tournament. Now, she does have, of course, that legendary loss to Liang Na, but that was in 2020, and she was 19 years old at the time. Feng Xiaocan actually looks to be pretty solid, and I do think that she is going to be able to beat Ming in this fight here. She is probably one of my higher pick confident picks on the card, if that makes any sense at all. She has got a pretty well-rounded game, but for the most part, she is going to want to go out there and get an offensive takedown. She can strike pretty well too, but I think that she doesn't really have any head movement, and for the most part, she's just running forward and throwing pretty high-volume combinations. Against Ming is going to be a lot smaller than Xiaocan Feng. Feng Xiaocan, is huge for this weight class. She stands at 5'7". Ming is a lot smaller, and she is very scrappy. She actually had a pretty fun fight against Xiao, where she and Xiao were kind of throwing down a lot in the pocket, and she was able to win a pretty good and fun decision, to be fair, in that one. And then against Dong Huashan was actually a very, very highly credited prospect who has spent a long time in the UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai, and she was able to defeat her, but Dong Huashan didn't look that good in her round 1 fight. I think Feng Xiaocan here is going to be a little bit better everywhere, and honestly, I think that on the feet, she might just have a little bit more confidence than Ming, because she just kind of looks a lot more composed in there, and I think that she can get takedowns as well. I am going to pick Feng Xiaocan. I think Feng Xiaocan's like minus 300. If I saw that correctly earlier, she is a massive favorite. Minus 300. I think it does make a little bit of sense because I am pretty confident in her winning this fight. Now we move up to Carlos Hernandez fighting against Nyamjargal Tumendemberel, and I think that this is a pretty tough debut for Nyamjargal here. Now, Carlos Hernandez seems to be the litmus test for like all of the undefeated prospects to see if they are going to be able to make it or not, because Carlos Hernandez has been through a very tough row of contenders recently. He did just fight Rei Saruya, who is pretty similar to Tatsuro Taira. So he just fought 2 undefeated Japanese fighters back to back with very similar, if not the exact same styles. And prior to that, he did actually beat Dennis Bondar and then fought against Alan Nascimento. But Nascimento, if you guys know him, is massive for the weight class. Now, of course, I have been very, I would say very critical of Carlos Hernandez in the past, I will be honest, because I thought that he actually lost his fight on the Contender Series to Daniel Barrios, and then I thought that he actually lost his fight to Victor Altamirano. So I thought that he actually lost those 2 fights by those split decision fights there that he lost, but that he won, I mean. But he's got very good skills, and I feel like against Dennis Bondar, he really showcased a level of boxing that I didn't actually know that he really had, because Carlos Hernandez, he actually does not mind wrestling offensively. That is something that he did do prior to coming into the UFC, and it does seem like he has been making some pretty rapid improvements in the hands. And I think that those rapid improvements in the hands are probably going to be quite important, because he's now fighting against Nyamjargal Tumendemberel, who is very dangerous. I mean, this is a guy who put a couple of guys to sleep in his fights on the road to UFC bonus fights against Petr Deniso. He come forward against Petr Deniso and just ran through him. And Petr Deniso, despite being 6-2, actually is going to be a pretty good prospect out of Thailand. And then before that, he did fight against Topnoi Karam. It was a close fight. Nyamjargal Tumendemberel gassed out a lot in that fight, so there definitely is going to be some problems with that cardio, or some questions with that cardio that we can ask. But for the most part, he has been finishing a lot of fights early, and in fact got a pretty viral KO, or at least, I mean, it come around on my Twitter, a 7-second KO win over Masayuki Watanabe, which got the UFC's attention. Now, the thing about Nyamjargal Tumendemberel is I don't think that he actually is that technical of a fighter, and I don't know how I feel about his cardio as per se either. For the most part, he really does rely on that power to either get a takedown or to get the knockout. And I don't know where he trains either, because if you look at his Instagram, I've actually followed him on Instagram for, must be about a year now, a year and a bit now. He does live that Mongolian lifestyle. Like, a lot of, if you guys don't know, the Mongolian people are very nomadic people. They don't really settle in cities or anything, or I guess the farmers don't anyway, because of the way that the weather happens there. And it seems like Nyamjargal Tumendemberel is just always traveling. So I don't know how much this guy is training, if he's training full-time like some of these other guys. I think that Carlos Hernandez, out of the two, is probably going to come in a little bit more prepared. And I know for sure that I think that Carlos Hernandez is going to be the more technical striker out of the two. And I think that Carlos Hernandez is going to have the better cardio as well. Nyamjargal Tumendemberel, we saw against Top Noi Karam that he gassed out. And that was a pretty fun fight, I know. But he did gas out quite a lot in that matchup. And I think that against Carlos Hernandez, Hernandez is going to have the better gas tank in rounds 2 and 3 to really put it on him. So I'm going to pick Carlos Hernandez here to win the fight by decision for the most part. I think Tumendemberel is going to be a tough guy to finish, but I think that Hernandez is going to get it done. He is a pretty big favorite. I think he's actually a little bit wider than minus 200 now. Never mind, he's about minus 200. But yeah, I think that Carlos Hernandez gets it done. Now, Volkan Oezdemir fights against Carlos Ulberg. Carlos Ulberg, of course, was at one point looking like he was going to be getting a huge fight on short notice against Jamal Hill, and then that was replaced by Anthony Smith. But that didn't end up happening. That was at one of those pay-per-views earlier on in the year, which is a shame that it's not going to happen. But now he is going to be fighting Volkan in the UFC Macau card. And it makes sense because New Zealand, I'm from New Zealand, and China is not really that geographically far away. You don't have to travel across the entire world to go to the USA or something like that. You can just go pretty much vertically upwards and you can get to China. So it makes sense for Ulberg to be fighting there. So if anyone's going to have the home fight, it probably would be Ulberg, because for Volkan, he's going to have to travel a lot further. But in the fight, though, I think that Ulberg can win. Now, Volkan is a guy that I do like. I have picked Volkan as an underdog quite a few times recently, and he has been coming through, of course. But I think that out of anyone, it's Carlos Ulberg's time to really shine here. Now, he is a very good kickboxer like Volkan is. Volkan has a kickboxing background as well. But if I'm kind of seeing anything, I think that Ulberg is going to be a bit faster. I don't know if he's going to be more powerful than Volkan, because if you guys remember Volkan's come up, he was knocking everyone out in like 60 seconds. I think that he's going to be a little bit more technical. I think if anyone's going to land first, it's going to be Carlos Ulberg, and I have kind of liked what I have seen from him recently. Now, of course, he knocked out Alonzo Menifield, but what happened in that fight was Ulberg threw a jab, and then Alonzo Menifield, I guess, had maybe never seen a jab before and just didn't know how to react to it. So he just ran forward like an idiot and got knocked out. But before that, though, he had a very, it was a bit of a war against Dawoon Jung. But he did, of course, end up doing a lot of damage to Dawoon Jung and then getting the submission there. It was a pretty brutal fight. And then he knocked out Iho Potieria. So it's a big step up in competition striking-wise for Ulberg, but I think he's going to be ready to take it. Volkan Oezdemir, of course, has recently got the big win over Bogdan Guskov, and Bogdan Guskov was coming in with a lot of hype. Volkan just kind of pressured him and hurt him, and then was able to get it done. And then he knocked out the great Johnny Walker. Oh boy, what I would do to see Carlos Ulberg fight against Johnny Walker. But I think Carlos Ulberg wins the fight by KO. Yeah, I think he's faster. That's kind of what it comes down to. I'm sorry, that was a really bad breakdown of the fight. But I think Ulberg's faster, and I'm pretty confident he's going to go out there and knock out Volkan Oezdemir. And then maybe he's going to be one fight away from the title. So maybe if he beats Oezdemir, maybe then he can fight, like, I don't know, Anthony Smith or Jamal Hill. Now we can move up. Wang Tiong versus Gabriela Fernandez. Wang Tiong is a prospect I was very high on coming into the Road to UFC tournament, and I'm very high on her now that she has been in the UFC and got a huge KO win over Victoria Leonardo. She did fight on a bonus fight on the Road to UFC tournament, kind of like a Contender Series fight. She looked good. She showcased grappling, of all things, which was quite interesting to see, and then she went out there and knocked out Victoria Leonardo, which was kind of huge for her. If you guys don't know who Wang Tiong is, she actually does have a kickboxing background, and she does hold a win over Valentina Shevchenko in 2015 in kickboxing. So this is literally Alex Pereira coming back into MMA, chasing down Israel Adesanya, except now women's 125, because Wang Tiong has been calling out Valentina, so it'll be interesting to see if she ever can make it up that far. And I think that she can against Gabriela Fernandez. Gabriela Fernandez, for the most part, is a striker. She does have wrestling, but I don't think that the wrestling threat is actually going to be enough to really disturb Wang Tiong. And I think that Wang Tiong, we're just going to kind of see that patience that we saw in the Leonardo fight. We're going to see the technique that we saw in the Leonardo fight. And I just think from what we've seen from Wang Tiong so far, she is just a really good striker. Like, really nice technical striker with pretty good power as well. I think that she can go out there against Fernandez, and honestly, I think she's going to knock Fernandez out. Fernandez come into the promotion on short notice against Jasmine Jasudavicius. Always going to be a tough short notice fight. Then she lost to Blader, but Blader is the opposite to Wang Tiong. She's a wrestler, and then she beat Carly Judice. And this is a similar matchup to Carly Judice in a way, but Carly Judice is just a lot more green, in my opinion, than Wang Tiong is. Wang Tiong pretty much lives at the Shanghai PI, and I think that she's going to be getting some massive developments there. There's a really good training staff over at the Shanghai PI, and a lot of fighters over there that are going to be coming up soon. I think that Wang Tiong wins, and I actually think she is going to get the knockout. I think she is going to knock out Gabriela Fernandez here. Massive favourite here. High confidence pick, minus 800 at the moment on one sportsbook. And I think she's going to go out there and get it done. I don't think she's going to disappoint. Now, Song Kenan fights against Muslim Salikov. Am I going to have an underdog pick here? Because I am picking Salikov, but he's minus 170. I don't think I do. Anyway, it is what it is. I'm picking Salikov to defeat Song Kenan. What I saw for Song Kenan fighting against Ricky Glenn, not great. Not great things. He looked slow. Really slow. The cardio was bad. The fight IQ was bad. The aggression was bad. The killer instinct was bad. It was all gone. Everything was gone, except for the ability to fight. And for Ricky Glenn, it was just even worse. Ricky Glenn's a bit older than Kenan Song, and he's a bit slower than Song Kenan, and he's smaller because he's a former lightweight. Song Kenan is a massive guy for 170. He's got huge power, but this guy just does not have any speed at all. He doesn't really throw it in combinations at all. And I think that against Muslim Salikov, yes, Muslim Salikov's nearly 41 years old now. I think Salikov's still the faster fighter out of the two. I think Salikov's the one that still has it. And this is exactly the same fight, in my opinion, than what Salikov's just most recent fight was, when he fought against Santiago Ponzinibbio, where I picked Salikov because I thought that Salikov, out of the two, was the one that still had it. And I think it's the same thing. Salikov is, of course, the medalist in Kung Fu. I believe it might have been in Wushu, which is Kung Fu. I'm pretty confident they're the same thing. But in this fight, though, I think that Salikov is going to be faster than Song Kenan. We saw Song Kenan hurt Ricky Glenn on multiple occasions and then just clinch against him. So he just refused to try. He just refused to get a knockout. I think that this is a fight where Salikov can just be the faster guy. Salikov doesn't really have it anymore. He has lost a few fights. He's 41. He's nearly 41 years old now. This man is old enough to be my father. But I think that he still is going to be, out of the two, the faster fighter, because Song Kenan, my goodness, this guy has disappointed. And Salikov, despite being the underdog on Tapology, is the favorite on the Fight Odds website. I think Salikov does win, and I think he wins by decision. Now we have Ozzy Diaz fighting against Zhang Mingyang. I think this is a good fight for Zhang Mingyang. I was actually doing my tape study on Ozzy Diaz this morning while I was eating my breakfast. And yeah, this is just a good fight for Zhang Mingyang. Ozzy Diaz is a brawler. I know for sure, I read somewhere that I think it was Mick Maynard that just really likes this guy and really wants him in the promotion. So I guess he's done something right to gain the favor of one of the matchmakers. But Ozzy Diaz fought on the Contender Series against Joe Pyfer. I actually picked him to win that fight. I'll be honest. It didn't age well, did it? But I did pick him to win that fight. And then after that, he did move up to 205 pounds, where he's got a couple of pretty big wins in ways that he actually won these fights in the exact same way. Ozzy Diaz is a brawler. He comes forward and he does brawl. He doesn't have the best technique, I don't think, but he is pretty aggressive and he does throw pretty good volume. He does pressure forwards a lot, which wears down on his opponents a lot, because if you actually watch his fights for the LFA at 205 pounds recently, he wins them both in the exact same way. Chuck Campbell was finding some success against Ozzy Diaz, and then he started to really kind of gas out, and Ozzy Diaz started to land some pretty big shots, and Campbell was just retreating. and then he got caught pretty badly, and he ended up getting finished in that case there with the flying knee. But before that, he set it up with a couple of right hands that hurt Campbell. And then against Bevon Lewis was actually getting a lot of takedowns on Ozzy Diaz. He actually took down Ozzy Diaz, I believe, twice in the first round, and then again in the second round. And he was gassed. Like, he was pretty gassed out in that second round. And he just kind of become a sitting duck for Ozzy Diaz. So the way that this guy has won his most recent fights at 205 pounds is just by wearing them down over time, by moving forwards over time, and eventually his opponents slow down, or they gas out, or they don't really have the same sort of defense that they had at the start of the fight, and then he knocks them out. But I don't know if he can really pull that off against Ming Yang Zhang, because Ming Yang Zhang, or Zhang Ming Yang, this guy's a madman. He's on a huge KO streak, or a huge first round finish streak. I think he's won every single fight in the first round since 2019. And he even did it at the UFC level as well, twice, because 2K Tokos is now actually in the UFC, fighting against Navajo Sterling, for Navajo Sterling's debut in December 14th. But yeah, he knocked out 2K Tokos as a huge underdog as well, by the way. It was like plus 700 for this fight, plus 450. I'm lying, but anyway, that was a huge performance. And then against Brenton Ribeiro, yes, he got caught a lot by Brenton Ribeiro, but he eventually got him. He eventually caught him, and he eventually got him there. And I did think against Brenton Ribeiro, he did actually look a lot worse than I expected him to. But for the most part, this guy actually still, despite having nearly 25 fights, is pretty green in MMA, because he hasn't really fought the best guys. Yes, he's finishing them, but he hasn't really finished the best guys. But he has beaten some UFC level guys now. And the way that he fights is he does use his height pretty well. He's going to be shorter than Ozzy Diaz, but he boxes from range. That's kind of all he does. He just boxes from range. One thing that I don't love about him, though, is that he just loves the brawl. He loves the war. He'll poke his tongue out at his opponents. He'll edge them on, telling them to come and fight him. That's going to be pretty scary when you're fighting against a power puncher like Brenton Ribeiro, who, as I said, hurt him, or at least landed big on him multiple times. And then against Ozzy Diaz, who is a guy that does have big KO power, and has now moved up to 205 pounds, and has gained some pretty decent weight at 205. But I think that Ming Yang Zhang, I think he's going to be pressuring forward himself. I think he's going to be the one moving forward and throwing first. I think he's going to be able to land first on Ozzy Diaz. One thing about Ozzy Diaz as well is, just from what I've seen, his takedown defense isn't great. So if Zhang Mingyang wanted to get a takedown, he probably could. I mean, Bevon Lewis was taking him down with no resistance at all. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. But I think I'm going to pick Zhang Mingyang to win by first round KO. But if the fight leaves the first round, I think that depending on how the first round has gone, Ozzy Diaz might be able to take over. Because as I said, that's how he wins. He wears his opponents down and then finishes them later. But I think that Zhang Mingyang is going to find the KO in the first round. He's a pretty big favorite himself, and I honestly am pretty confident in him as well. I think that he's a pretty fun prospect at 205 pounds. You don't really see that many guys from Asia in these upper weight classes. Minus 310 for Ming Yang Zhang. Now, Xiaocan is fighting against Tabitha Ricci. This is kind of just a case for me of who's more well-rounded, and I think that Yan Xiaonan is the more well-rounded fighter in this fight. Now, Tabitha Ricci, we know what she's good at. Very good BJJ. The wrestling's okay, but the striking isn't amazing. And I think that's kind of what's going to be showing here against Yan Xiaonan, who we know is a very good striker, very good boxer, in fact. And we have seen her find a lot of success in the boxing, and even, I thought, found a lot of success in the boxing against Weili Zhang, or Zhang Weili. One thing as well about Yan Xiaonan is that she has found so much success on the feet against other pretty good strikers. Against Marina Rodriguez, I thought she won that fight. I thought she won the first. I think it was the first 2 rounds that I was pretty confident that she won against Rodriguez. And then, of course, she beat Duran after showcasing much better takedown defense than she did against Esparza, because she did get smoked by Esparza on the ground. And then she knocked out Andrade. But I think in this fight, it's just going to come down to, can Yan Xiaonan keep the fight on the feet? And I think that she can. I think that she can keep the fight on the feet against Tabitha Ricci. And I think that on the feet, she is going to be the much better striker. And although she did take a lot of damage against Weili Zhang, she still did find some success there. She did find some success hurting Zhang Weili on the feet as well, which was quite cool. That fight should have been on this card. I thought it should have been in China, at least, anyway. But it is what it is. I think if you're picking Ricci, you're relying on her to get the takedowns. That's one thing that Ricci has still kind of struggled with so far in her career. and she does not have really any striking threat at all. So I think it is just going to be Yan Xiaonan finding a lot of success in the boxing against Ricci. She just needs to not get taken down, and I think she'll be pretty good. But one thing is, Team Alpha Male, we're about to talk about Team Alpha Male soon, because Song Yadong fought recently against Petr Yan. Training at Team Alpha Male, your wrestling's going to improve, and that has happened. We've seen Yan Xiaonan improve her wrestling a lot recently. Now we can move up to the main event now. Petr Yan is fighting against Deiveson Figueiredo. Pretty massive fight, I feel. I feel like for Figgy, if he beats Yan, I think he would have to be next in line for the title shot at 135 pounds, given the fact that he is a former champion at 125. It kind of is a little bit crazy that he has had to go through so many opponents now to potentially get that title shot at 135, but I guess he never really was a dominant champion at 125, but you could say that he saved the promotion, he saved the division of 125, and he has not been rewarded with a title shot at this weight class. Now, one thing I will say about Figgy, now that he's moved up to 135, is that he has looked a lot smaller than I thought he was going to. I thought him moving up to 135, given how massive he was at 125, he would kind of fit in. He wouldn't really look that small compared to his opponents here, and that hasn't really been the case at all. I have actually thought. I think that Figgy has actually looked very small. In fact, he looked very, very small against Cody Garbrandt. There we go, Cody Garbrandt in their UFC 300 matchup, where in that fight it was actually the wrestling and the grappling that really paid off for him, because Garbrandt was finding a lot of success in the boxing, and I think that you can draw some parallels to this matchup here against Petr Yan. We know what Petr Yan's really good at. Petr Yan is really good at boxing, and he does make very nice reads on the feet. His defensive wrestling and grappling is quite good. Now, it did struggle a little bit against Aljamain Sterling in their second fight, but I still think that he has got pretty good overall defensive wrestling and defensive grappling. One thing that he did recently do, of course, was fight against Song Yadong in a matchup which both guys actually wrestled quite a bit, and that was over 15 minutes. Song Yadong attempted 8 takedowns. Petr Yan defended 7 of them, which is quite good, and he defended a lot of the takedowns of Marab's as well, and he even got a couple of his own takedowns against Song Yadong while outstriking him as well. So we did just see Petr Yan kind of have a pretty nice comeback win, where I thought that Song Yadong, I think I picked Song Yadong in that fight. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I did. We saw Petr Yan have a massive comeback win over a guy that was very much up and coming in Song Yadong. And I think that Petr Yan against Deiveson Figueiredo here, we just saw Deiveson struggle with the size and the boxing of Cody Garbrandt. And I think that we are going to see Petr Yan go out there and find similar success. I think that we are going to see Petr Yan go out there and have a pretty good striking advantage over Deiveson. I know that might sound a little bit crazy to say, crazy to hear, but one thing that I will say about Petr is that he might just be one of the best strikers in the promotion still, even though he went on that losing streak. His fight against Corey Sandhagen here, this was one of the best fights of the year. That was a very, very high level striking display from both of those guys, and it was an amazing fight that I think was definitely a contender for the best fight of the year anyway, just kind of the high levelness that it was. Against Figgy, I think Petr Yan can do that. One thing about Petr, though, is he does take the first round off all the time. He's a very slow starter. He can take the first 2.5 minutes off. That's actually what cost him, I thought, his fight against Sterling. And I think that against Figgy, though, he can defend the takedowns. We just saw him defend takedowns against Song Yadong, who isn't really the best offensive wrestler. But as I said, he's a young up-and-coming guy at 135 who does have the power in the hands, and he has been developing that wrestling alongside Uriah Faber. And I think that against Figgy, we're going to see Yan find similar success on the feet as to what we just saw Cody Garbrandt find against Deiveson Figueiredo. I know that he did have a good performance against Cheeto, and it really does kind of make a lot of people think that maybe Cheeto just doesn't quite have it the same anymore. But I think Yan's still the real deal. I mean, I was kind of off him. I will admit, I was off him. But now I'm back on him after that Song Yadong performance. I really am. I think that Yan can go out there against Figgy and win a decision. I would be surprised if he got a finish. Yan hasn't really been the biggest finisher recently. I know he does have a couple finishes in the promotion, but I think it's been a while now since he's got them. I think that Petr Yan can go out there and win this fight. He's a huge favorite now. I believe it looks like minus 330 for the most part, but there is one here, only minus 250, so maybe the line's moving, I don't know. But Petr Yan's the pick. I think Petr Yan wins. Looks like it's just a card which I'm picking all the favorites on. I was picking Zhu Kang Shui, and now the fight's been cancelled, and because it's a road to UFC final, what they will probably do is they'll probably postpone it. So there we go, 13 fights, 13 favorites, we're back at it, but hey, it is what it is. We can move now. That's it for the video. Sorry guys, I am tired. I'll see you guys in the next one.